Ladies and gentlemen of ATL, welcome. This is a short video I created just to recap our first session, but also use it to help you understand how the first session connects with the second session. So if you recall, we looked at Fink's kind of model of significant learning, and Fink believed that you start with the situational factors, and then once you understand those, you can better prepare teaching and learning activities and feedback and assessment that align with the learning goals. And so in our first session, we looked a little bit at rapport building. And in order to build rapport, we of course have to understand who we are. So I asked you to take the teaching goals inventory as well as the teaching perspective inventory to really understand kind of how you approach teaching and learning. And if you want, you can really compare it to the taxonomy of significant learning. So then if you're like me, you can say, oh wow, I'm really nurturing. I see how I'm kind of more on the left side of the spectrum when maybe I need to balance it out a little bit more and think more about that foundational knowledge, that application, that integration, but still remember that a huge part of me is that nurturing aspect. I really want to help my students grow as individuals, and I really want to do it in a friendly way. And so just knowing that allows me to communicate that with my students. But when we're talking about rapport building or communicating, who we are with our students, we have to remember that although traditionally it's always been one-sided, we also want to look at the other side, which is kind of how we get to understand our students. And why is that important? Well, because if you look at this communication model here, you can see that the source is also the receiver, and the receiver is also the source. And they have to work together to kind of encode and decode these messages and make sense out of them, given that there's noise and all sorts of feedback, and they have to choose what are the best channels. And so, I want you to be thinking about how you choose kind of what are the best channels to kind of communicate who you are with your students, providing a mirror so that they can see kind of within themselves. Now, this is of course my example of how I provide windows and mirrors. I actually let my students know about who I am, but that's because that's the type of person I am. I like people to know about me. And so although you may not feel comfortable with that, that's okay. Either way, you want to make sure that you at least communicate with your students kind of why you approach teaching the way you do. For instance, there was a great example. One of our cohort members was talking about how they have timed quizzes for their students. And their students get kind of angry because they're like, wow, we don't have time to go over our notes. And of course, the instructor, says, right, I don't want you to look at your notes. Use this quiz as an opportunity to understand where you sit in the class. And I think that's so perfect, that example was brought up, because sometimes I think we forget to communicate with students kind of who we are, right? Again, remembering that side of rapport building, but also understand that students also have a unique identity and a unique way of thinking, and they bring that into the class, whether they're a post-traditional learner according to SOARS, or a first-generation learner, or a millennial learner, or something in between. We need to be thinking about, now that our students know about us, what do we know about our students? And more importantly, what do we need to know about them in order to help them be successful in our class? We don't want to stereotype them necessarily and say, oh, you're a first generation learner, so you must need this, or oh, you're a millennial learner, so you must need this. Instead, we want to just kind of look at what they bring to the table and want to give them opportunities to share their side of the story with us, just as we share our side of the story with them. And that's really where self-authorship comes into play, right? Now, a lot of classes are going to look specifically at that cognitive dimension, but we forget about really bringing in the students' experiences via the relationships they have and who they are. And this is where that other side of the coin comes into play when we talk about rapport building, right? We need to understand our students so that we can understand how they view knowledge, how they view themselves, and what relationships they deem important, and how those relationships then kind of dictate how they act. Think about the idea of peer pressure, right? There are a lot of students who are under the impression they have to act a certain way. And so what's cool about the learning partnerships model is it takes all this into account. It takes all your situational factors into account, including kind of who you are, but also who your students are. And it offers this model of thinking about how to offer the correct amount of support and challenge. And that's what we're going to be talking about when we first meet this coming Friday. So be keeping in mind that we're also going to have a student panel. So you have an opportunity to really talk with students and ask them about who they are and kind of what they want, not necessarily out of their instructors, but what they want instructors to know about them and kind of how they feel about this idea of rapport being a two-way street, knowing about their professor, but also the professor knowing about them. So I hope that you can think about how all this stuff connects, and you can see that these situational factors that we're going to be discussing and that we have discussed all fit into the big picture, which is Fink's model of significant learning, right? If we can understand these situational factors, then we can go in strategically thinking about the teaching and learning activities and how we assess and give feedback and how that all aligns with our learning goals. But again, we can't understand that until we understand ourselves, but also our learners. So I hope this is helpful for you, and I cannot wait to see you on Friday.